The thing about clean sheets is they're supposed to be innocent, until a man who smells like cedar and unspoken threats runs his thumb along your jaw and asks if you're afraid of him. That's when Zara learned that some stains don't wash out, no matter how good you are at your job. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Zara Williams had cleaned penthouses for celebrities, politicians, and at least one person she was 70% sure ran an illegal exotic animal ring. None of them prepared her for Min-jun Park. The glass tower in downtown Seoul gleamed like a middle finger to the sun, all chrome and arrogance. Zara smoothed her blazer, the one that said professional but whispered don't test me, and reminded herself that a job paying triple her usual rate was worth dealing with whatever eccentric billionaire awaited her. The elevator ride to the 48th floor felt like ascending to judgment. Her reflection stared back at her. Dark skin glowing against the sleek interior, box braids pulled into a neat bun, lips painted a shade of red that her best friend called intimidation crimson. She looked good. She always looked good. The doors opened to reveal a reception area that screamed money so old it had grown bored with itself. Marble floors, minimalist furniture, and a view of Seoul that made her feel simultaneously powerful and insignificant. Miss Williams, a woman in a tailored suit, appeared, her expression professionally blank. Mr. Park will see you now. Mr. Park, the name on her employment contract. The man who needed a live-in domestic specialist and was willing to pay obscenely for discretion. Red flags everywhere, but Zara's student loans didn't care about red flags. She followed the assistant down a hallway lined with art that probably cost more than her childhood home. The double doors at the end opened to an office that redefined the concept of corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around two walls. A desk that looked carved from a single piece of black walnut. And behind it, Min-jun Park was beautiful in the way that expensive cars were beautiful. Sleek, dangerous, and designed to make you forget about consequences. Sharp jawline, dark hair styled with calculated carelessness, and a suit that fit like a prayer. He didn't look up from the document he was reading, but Zara felt his attention on her like heat from a flame. Sit. His voice was smooth, accented, and entirely too commanding for someone who was technically interviewing her. Zara sat. Then, because she'd never met a power dynamic she couldn't immediately complicate, she crossed her legs and said, "You know, most people start with hello." His eyes lifted, dark, assessing, and suddenly very focused. A smile threatened the corner of his mouth, the kind that suggested he found her amusing in the way a cat finds a particularly bold mouse amusing. "Hello, Miss Williams." He set down his pen with deliberate care. "Tell me why someone with your qualifications wants to work as a maid." "Domestic specialist," she corrected. "And you say qualifications like cleaning isn't skilled labor." "I say qualifications because you have a degree in international business from Howard University and speak 3 languages. So again, why are you here?" Zara blinked. He'd done homework. Thorough homework. That was either impressive or terrifying. Possibly both. "Student loans," she said honestly. "The great American dream wrapped in debt. You're paying 3 times market rate for someone to organize your sock drawer." "I'm pragmatic, not proud. I don't need my sock drawer organized." "Then what do you need?" The silence that followed felt heavy with implications she couldn't quite grasp. Min-jun leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Discretion," he said finally. "Loyalty. Someone who can exist in my space without asking questions I won't answer." "So you're a drug lord or a vampire?" "Got it." His laugh surprised them both, short, genuine, and entirely at odds with his controlled exterior. "Neither. Though I've been called worse." "Worse than vampire?" "Impressive. Miss Williams." He stood, rounding the desk with a predatory grace that made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "I'm offering you a position that will require you to live in my home, maintain absolute confidentiality about everything you see or hear, and accept that there will be unusual circumstances." He stopped in front of her chair, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and subtly spiced. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Unusual how?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Let's say I have complicated business dealings. Associates who value privacy. Meetings that occur at odd hours. His gaze dropped to her mouth for a fraction of a second before returning to her eyes. Nothing illegal. Nothing that will endanger you. But things that will test your ability to remain uninvolved. Zara's grandmother had always warned her about men who looked at women like they were puzzles to be solved. Min-jun Park was looking at her like she was a puzzle wrapped in a challenge wrapped in something he couldn't quite categorize. I can be uninvolved, she said. Question is, can you handle someone in your space who doesn't scare easy? His smile was slow, deliberate, and absolutely devastating. Miss Williams, I'm counting on it. The penthouse was ridiculous. Not just expensive, Zara had seen expensive. This was next level. A sprawling space that occupied the entire top floor, with views that made her feel like she was floating above the city. Minimalist decor in blacks, grays, and whites. Art that she suspected was famous. A kitchen that looked like it had never seen actual cooking. Her suite, because of course it was a suite, not just a room, was tucked in the east wing. Private bathroom with a tub the size of her old apartment. A bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud made of good decisions. She'd unpacked, changed into comfortable clothes, and was exploring the kitchen when Min-jun appeared. He'd shed the suit jacket, rolled his sleeves to reveal forearms that had no business being that distracting. His tie was loosened, and there was a tiredness around his eyes that made him seem almost human. You don't have to start tonight, he said, watching her investigate his refrigerator. Take the evening to settle in. I'm exploring my domain. She pulled out ingredients with the confidence of someone who'd learned to cook from her grandmother and a dozen YouTube channels. When's the last time someone made you a real meal in this kitchen? Define real meal. Something that didn't come from a five-star restaurant or a delivery app. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, looking genuinely curious. 6 months. Maybe 7. Tragic. She started pulling out pans. Sit down. Let me do the one thing I can do that has nothing to do with cleaning. You cook. Baby, I cook. There's a difference. Watching Zara Williams take over his kitchen was like watching a force of nature get organized. She moved with efficient grace, humming under her breath, occasionally tasting things with a critical expression that made him want to know what other things she tasted with that same focus. Min-jun told himself to stop that line of thinking immediately. She was his employee. He needed her professional, uninvolved, and definitely not occupying the increasingly inappropriate corners of his imagination. He had rules, boundaries, self-control that had been honed over years of surviving in a world where weakness got you killed. You're staring. She didn't look up from the vegetables she was chopping with impressive knife skills. I'm supervising. You're making me nervous. I seriously doubt anything makes you nervous. She glanced at him, one eyebrow raised. You'd be surprised what gets under my skin. The double meaning hung in the air like smoke. Min-jun felt something in his chest tighten, want mixed with warning. This woman was going to be trouble. The question was whether he was smart enough to avoid it. 30 minutes later, she placed a plate in front of him that smelled like home, if home had been something he'd ever really had. Jollof rice, perfectly seasoned chicken, and plantains that glistened with promise. He took a bite, closed his eyes, forgot, for just a moment, about everything except the fact that this was the best thing he'd eaten in years. Good? She asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. You're hired for life. That's what they all say before they taste my jerk chicken. They ate in comfortable silence, which should have been impossible with someone he'd met hours ago. But Zara had a way of existing in space that felt natural, unforced. She asked questions about the city, laughed at his dry observations about Korean-American business culture, and somehow made his sterile penthouse feel lived in for the first time since he'd bought it. So, she said, pushing her empty plate away, are you going to tell me why a man who clearly doesn't need a maid is paying someone to live in his home? I told you. Discretion. Yeah, but discretion from what? Or who? Min-jun set down his fork. The playful atmosphere shifted, cooling several degrees. There are things about my life you don't need to know. Things like why you have a panic button hidden under your desk, or why that art in your office is positioned to hide a safe, or why your building has more security than most embassies. She'd noticed. Of course she'd noticed. He'd underestimated her, which was dangerous and somehow incredibly attractive. You're observant. I'm employed to be in your space without asking questions. Doesn't mean I don't notice things. She stood, collecting their plates. I'm not asking you to tell me your secrets, but don't insult my intelligence by pretending they don't exist. Fair enough. He watched her move to the sink. But some secrets exist to protect people. Remember that. Noted. She glanced over her shoulder. For the record, I grew up in Baltimore. I know dangerous when I see it. Whatever you're into, I can handle myself. That's what worries me. 3 days passed in surreal domesticity. Zara established routines, learned the penthouse's rhythms, and tried very hard not to notice how Min-jun looked in the morning with wet hair and reading glasses. She failed spectacularly at that last part. He was around, not hovering, but present in ways that made her hyper-aware of her own body. The way he'd reach past her for coffee, his chest briefly pressing against her shoulder. How his hand would steady her elbow when she climbed a ladder to dust high shelves. The long looks across rooms that felt like conversations they weren't having out loud. It was professional. Entirely professional. Except for how it absolutely wasn't. Wednesday evening, she was organizing his study when she found the photograph. It was tucked inside a book, like someone had hidden it and forgotten. A young Min-jun, maybe 19, standing next to a beautiful woman with kind eyes. They were laughing, his arm around her shoulders, looking genuinely happy in a way she'd never seen him look in person. That's not yours to see. Zara spun. Min-jun stood in the doorway, and for the first time since meeting him, she saw something raw in his expression. Anger, yes, but underneath it, pain. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the photo from her hands with barely controlled gentleness. This room is off limits. I should have specified. Who is she? Someone who doesn't concern you. The dismissal stung more than it should have. Zara straightened her spine, channeling every ounce of dignity she possessed. You're right. None of my business. Won't happen again. She moved to leave, but his hand caught her wrist. Not hard, just enough to stop her. Wait. She looked at his hand on her skin, then up at his face. Something in the air shifted, charged like the moment before lightning strikes. His thumb moved, just slightly, against her pulse point. He could feel her heartbeat, she realized, could feel how his touch affected her. I'm not angry with you, he said quietly. I'm angry at myself for leaving it where you could find it. Why? Because I don't want you asking questions I'll have to lie about. They stood there, connected by his hand on her wrist, staring at each other like they were both trying to solve equations that had no solutions. Zara could feel the heat of him, smell that cologne that had started haunting her sleep, and she knew that if she leaned forward even slightly, something irreversible would happen. Min-jun's gaze dropped to her mouth. His grip on her wrist tightened fractionally. This is inappropriate, he murmured, though he didn't let go. Extremely. You work for me. Yep. This can't happen. Definitely not. Neither of them moved. The air between them felt thick enough to taste. Want and restraint mixed into something intoxicating. Then his phone rang. The spell shattered. Min-jun released her wrist, stepping back like she'd burned him. He answered the call in rapid Korean, his entire demeanor shifting from whatever they'd almost been back to controlled, dangerous businessman. Zara fled to her room, closed the door, and pressed her back against it, trying to remember how to breathe normally. This job, she thought, is going to be complicated. Friday night, Min-jun told her to stay in her suite after 8. No questions, no negotiations. Something in his tone made her agree without her usual pushback. She tried to read, tried to watch Netflix, ended up pacing her room like a caged animal, wondering what kind of business meeting required her to be hidden away. Around 10, she heard voices, multiple men speaking in Korean. One voice stood out, oily and aggressive in tone even through the language barrier. Against every instinct for self-preservation, Zara cracked her door open. The suite's layout allowed a view of the main living area if you positioned yourself just right. She could see Min-jun standing near his bar, facing 3 men in expensive suits. The oily-voiced one was doing most of the talking, gesturing aggressively. Min-jun's posture was relaxed, but Zara had learned to read his tension. It was there in the set of his shoulders, the calculated stillness that preceded violence. One of the men said something that made the others laugh, except Min-jun. He simply smiled, cold and sharp, and replied in a tone that shut everyone up. Then the oily man pulled out a gun. Zara's heart slammed against her ribs. Her self-defense instructors from college training flooded back. Assess, escape, alert authorities. But calling the police felt wrong when Min-jun was standing there looking utterly unafraid of the weapon pointed at his chest. He said something in Korean. The man with the gun laughed. Min-jun moved. What happened next was too fast to fully process. One moment the gun was pointed at Min-jun. The next it was on the floor. The man was on his knees with Min-jun's hand on the back of his neck, and the other two men had their hands raised in surrender. Min-jun spoke quietly, a long sentence that sounded like a promise and a threat wrapped together. The men left, quickly, the oily one last, nursing what looked like a dislocated shoulder, shooting venomous looks back at Min-jun. The door closed. Silence filled the penthouse like a held breath. Min-jun poured himself a drink, downed it in one swallow, and turned to look directly at her hiding spot. You can come out now. Shit. Zara emerged, trying to look casual and probably failing miserably. How did you know? Your perfume. You wear vanilla and something else I can't place. I've been smelling it for the last 10 minutes. He poured another drink. You were supposed to stay in your room. There was a gun. There's always a gun. The casual way he said it made her stomach twist. This wasn't shock or fear in his voice. It was tired acceptance. Whatever world Min-jun operated in, weapons and threats were Tuesday evenings. Who are you? The question came out softer than she intended. Really? He studied her over the rim of his glass, weighing something. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. My family has business interests throughout Seoul. Legitimate operations that occasionally intersect with less legitimate players. I inherited responsibilities I didn't want and power that comes with complicated expectations. You're Mafia, not a question. The Korean term is different, but essentially, yes. He moved closer, crouching in front of her so they were eye level. The woman in that photograph, Ji-yoon. She was Yang Seo's daughter. We fell in love. Her father approved the match because it secured my loyalty. Zara's stomach dropped. What happened to her? Rival family. They wanted to send a message about territory disputes. Grabbed her from a cafe in broad daylight. By the time we found her. His voice went flat, emotionless in the way of people who'd locked their pain behind steel doors. I killed every person involved. 13 men. And the family that ordered it lost everything: businesses, territory, respect. I burned them to the ground. The casual way he admitted to multiple murders should have terrified her. Instead, she saw the wound beneath the violence. Grief weaponized into vengeance. I'm sorry. Don't be. I made my choices. But that's who I am, Zara. That's the world you've walked into. I took over operations Ji-yoon would have inherited. I'm bound to the Yang Seo family until they release me or I die. Everything I do, every business decision, every breath I take, it's all part of that obligation. And me? Why did you really hire me? His hand came up, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Because the Yang Seo patriarch is dying. When he goes, there will be a succession war, different factions fighting for control. I need to appear stable, unshakable, focused on legitimate business. A live-in domestic employee suggests normalcy. Someone I'm seen with socially, but who isn't romantically involved suggests I've moved past Ji-yoon's death appropriately. So I'm a prop, a cover story. You were supposed to be. His hand moved to cup her jaw. But you're sharp, funny, fearless in ways that terrify me. You cook jollof rice that tastes like home and talk back to men who could kill you without consequence. You were supposed to be simple, Zara. You're the most complicated thing that's happened to me in years. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What happens now? Someone knows I'm compromised, that I care about you more than strategic thinking allows. And now you're a target. His eyes searched hers, desperate. The safest place for you now is beside me, where I can control access and monitor threats. That's one option. What's the other? She leaned forward, closing the distance between them until their faces were inches apart. You could trust me, really trust me. Tell me everything. Let me help instead of protecting me like I'm fragile. And stop treating whatever this is between us like it's a liability instead of... He kissed her. Not the desperate goodbye from before, but something slower, deeper, tinged with surrender. His hands framed her face like she was precious, breakable, worth every rule he was shattering. Zara melted into it, tasting salt and heat and possibility. Her fingers found his shoulders, feeling muscle and scars and the rapid beat of his pulse. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Min-jun pressed his forehead against hers. You're going to get me killed. Feelings mutual. I mean it, Zara. Everything I touch turns to violence eventually. Then teach me. Show me how to survive in your world instead of trying to keep me separate from it. He pulled back, studying her with an expression that was equal parts admiration and concern. You're serious. Completely. I didn't survive Baltimore by being delicate. You want someone who can handle themselves? Stop underestimating what I can handle. A slow smile spread across his face. Genuine, almost boyish. Jiun would have liked you. She had the same stubborn refusal to accept limitations. Is that a compliment or a warning? Both. Welcome to Afro-Korean soul romance. If you're feeling the heat, the tension, and desperate to know what happens next, subscribe now and never miss a moment of this explosive story.